The Chesapeake Bay, 166,000 square kilometers of watershed spread across 6 U.S. states. Once the world's most productive waterway with a thriving seafood industry, it supplied the planet with nearly half its oysters. But pollution and climate change have taken their toll. Extreme weather, higher water temperatures and rising sea levels are causing long-lasting implications for the bay's waters, wildlife and watershed. In short, the Chesapeake Bay is a microcosm for our discussion about the impact of the global climate crisis. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and welcome to CGTN America's Global Action Initiative 2021, Project Earth. The grim reality is that climate change is happening because of us. Human activities are releasing excessive amounts of greenhouse gases, degrading our atmosphere. Over the next 45 minutes, we'll focus on CGTN America's commitment to covering the climate crisis and the existential threat to our planet. But first, we begin right here on Maryland's Eastern Shore. Tom Horton's journalism career spans 50 years. He's written 8 books and produced a number of short films, all about life in and around the Chesapeake Bay. Tom, this is your area, your home. You grew up around here, spent a great deal of time on these waters here. What are some of your fondest memories?
Well, the part of the Chesapeake I grew up in, Dorchester County, the Middle Eastern Shore, we'd call it. I mean, it was a kid's paradise, a teenage boy's paradise. Just unlimited forests and marshes and shorelines to fish around, to pick up soft crabs shedding in the grass, which are mighty good to eat. Just a cornucopia, you know, hunted ducks and geese all winter, caught striped bass and many other varieties of fish all summer, and all the crabs and oysters you could pick up. It was by no means pristine. We're talking 1950s and 60s, but my goodness, it was just all the abundance and freedom to roam and beautiful scenery. You know, it was a pretty good place to be a youth.
You know, I talked earlier about this bay being a microcosm for the climate crisis. Now, you've produced a few short films, one about nearby Dorchester County. Let's watch a bit of that.
I'm standing where I used to bat a softball around with my friends when I was a kid, in the front yard of my dad's hunting and fishing cabin on the Honga River in lower Dorchester County. If the consequences of global warming and rising sea levels and the worsening erosion and the high tides they bring seem a little hazy to you, come take a tour of Dorchester County, where the future is now. Check out the dying forests, sunken tombstones, waterlogged home foundations of communities going into the bay.
That's pretty dramatic there, Tom. What kinds of changes have you seen to the environment, to the plants, the fish, the wildlife out here?
Well, we've always had erosion on the Chesapeake for thousands of years, but the erosion's getting worse. Why is that? Because sea level is pushing it, exacerbating it. So we're losing land a lot faster around the edges. I'm seeing in the last 20 years just rank after rank of dying trees, forests that were always green and healthy. They look a little yellow one year, next year they look a little worse, and you come back in 5 years and 100 feet back, it's all ghostly white trunks. I'd never heard the term ghost forests until, I don't know who coined it, I didn't, but lots of ghost forests where there were forests. That forest in the film down by my dad's old cabin, that used to be thick enough that a kid could get lost in it. I'd worry whether I could find my way back to the cabin. Now you can see through it. So big changes.
What about the regional economy?
You know, seafood is a big part of it, harvesting crabs and oysters and striped bass, and we still have that. We're moving more and more into aquaculture, but a lot of the cultures, the communities of fishermen, the fishermen are having to move elsewhere, fish from the mainland. Some just aren't fishing anymore because it's becoming more and more untenable to live on those low-lying places. That was the place to be as long as sea level was fairly stable, because you were right next to what you were harvesting, and less and less is it the place you want to be.
Now, can any of the degradation that we're seeing, any of the damage that's been done to the bay, can it be reversed?
You can keep it from getting worse, from proceeding faster, but no, we've probably got baked in, if we stop burning fossil fuels tomorrow, baked in an estimated 5-6 feet of sea level rise here on the Chesapeake by the end of the century, and of course that could go up. It seldom seems to go down. So we got that much baked in, and that's enough to probably flood half of my home county, Dorchester. We know that because we had a storm surge in 2003, about 5.5 feet, flooded 55% of Dorchester County. So we don't have to guess too much what 5.5 feet looks like.
That's right, yeah, because, you know, extreme weather and rising sea levels, they take their toll in different ways. This area is seeing islands going underwater, Tangier Island, also Smith Island, where you've lived for a time.
Yeah, and those are unique cultures that we're losing. I mean, yeah, you lose some fish and crab production, but you can farm those, but you can't replace cultures that have evolved with nature for 300 years. I mean, they're just wonderful places, from the language to the fishing craft. Those are going.
Now we have another excerpt here. This is from your film, An Island Out of Time. Let's watch.
Smith Island's got the same problems as other low-lying places around the bay. Some landscapes I knew there 30 years ago are beneath the waves now. The aftermath of the nor'easter gives a glimpse of what the island could look like every day later in this century, drowned, washed away by erosion and rising seas. But the more imminent threat is not the disappearance of land, but the disappearance of a culture and the people who have defined it for centuries.
I'm struck there, Tom, by what you said right at the end of that clip, where you said the disappearance of a culture from the people who have defined it for centuries. Elaborate on that for us. You were just on Smith Island.
Yeah.
How many people live there, and why do they still live there?
Smith Island is down to maybe 100, 120 year-round residents now. When I lived there for 3 years in the late 80s, there were several hundred. At least 350, 400, and a lot of reasons people are leaving, but one of the big ones is it's less and less certain that that place is viable. It floods more frequently. A lot of the forest is turning to marsh, the high marsh is turning to low marsh, and just more and more days every year you got to put on boots every time you leave your house. And even for people who are used to living 10 miles out in the bay, that gets to be a lot. And the culture, yeah, it's unique. It's a 300-year-old culture based on fishing the Chesapeake, and it's going.
You know, one of the immediate impacts that we have seen, and we talked about this earlier when we reported that, you know, this area used to supply half the planet with its oysters.
Oh, yeah.
But that's not the case anymore.
Yeah, back in the 1880s, about 2 of every 5 people fishing for a living in the United States were oystermen on Chesapeake Bay. That's 40% of all the fishermen in America were catching oysters on Chesapeake Bay. That was not sustainable, by the way. And, you know, we've depleted oysters by overfishing, and now they're increasingly threatened by warmer waters. I mean, the waters right off where we're sitting have warmed about 4 degrees Fahrenheit since the 1930s. And that's daily measurements, average, but We're projecting this Chesapeake here in Maryland is going to have water temperatures more like South Florida by the end of the century. That's not going to be good for a lot of the seafood in the bay. We could also have acidification problems attacking the oyster shells. We don't see that big time yet, but it is a real concern. So, yeah, most of what we know about what climate change is going to do to the Chesapeake cuts against most of what we value about the Chesapeake as far as seafood. There will obviously be winners and losers, but a lot of what we value now is going to be a loser.
Tom, from what you've experienced here, from what you've learned here, what would you like the rest of the world and world leaders to know about the impact of climate change?
Well, I want them to pay attention. We chose Dorchester County and the low-lying islands because it sounds trite, but you know the future is now. We don't have to speculate about what it will be like. We see what it's like. So it's the classic canary in the coal mine, the early warning system. I hope that they take more action. You know, I saw today that we are beginning to bend the CO2 curve a little bit, but not even close to what we need to. We got this baked in 5 or 6 feet of sea level rise, but it could get a lot worse than that, and I don't think we've got long to keep it at 5 or 6 feet. I think we could adapt to that if it occurs over the next several decades. Not easy, but we could adapt to that. But if you got 9, 10, 12 feet, I don't know if you can adapt to that.
Tom Horton, thanks so much for being with us.
Well, my pleasure.
For more of our GAI content, check out our website at www.globalactioninitiative.com. You'll find full episodes of all our daily shows, exclusive documentaries focused on climate change, speeches and interviews with our VIP guests, and feature stories on everyday heroes fighting to save the planet. And if you're really in a hurry, just scan the QR code with your mobile phone. Over the past decade, CGTN America has been a leader in providing in-depth coverage of the global climate crisis. From the warming temperatures and melting glaciers of the Arctic to extreme weather and wildfires around the world, CGTN America's special reports and in-depth documentaries have chronicled the changing climate. Our latest zero-hour series of documentaries takes you to China, Africa, Europe, Latin America, Southeast Asia, and the United States, focusing on those impacted by climate change and those advocating for change. We've brought together 3 of our climate journalists to discuss their work. CGTN's climate reporter Gabriel Yin, independent filmmaker Mike Kirsch, and CGTN's Sean Calebs. His latest documentary is Zero Hour: Climate Change in the United States.
Sean, you've done a lot of reporting on the climate crisis over the past decade. You've produced news stories and documentaries for CGTN America. We just saw a montage which included a much younger Sean Caleb's reporting. How did you make it relevant at a time when not much attention was being paid to the climate crisis?
I really think that's a key point that you talked about. Not a lot of people were doing this back in 2013 when we first went to Greenland. And I read an article that said that 98% of the Greenland ice sheet experienced melting in one day. That doesn't mean 98% of it melted. That just means over the surface, 98% of it had experienced some melting. It was causing massive flooding, massive runoff, record type stuff. And I read that and I went to my superiors at CGTN and they said, this is something we need to do. And within 3 days, we were up there. So I think that there was a recognition that this is going to be an important story. This is going to be something that really could dictate the way this whole millennium kind of runs because it's such an important issue. And we were able to do that and it really hit a nerve. I think that environmental reporting is something that no matter where you live on Earth, where you see a story that touches a certain corner of the globe, everybody can relate to it, whether it's ice, whether it's fire, whether it's the seas, whether it's wildlife, and so much of it, and people feel so passionately. So I think that exposing the concerns, really highlighting the concerns and making it relevant to people, to use your word, is the challenge, and it's something I think we take very seriously.
Well, let's go back to 2013 to your reporting from Greenland. Let's watch.
In the far frigid north, the ocean meets jagged maritime glaciers. Soon, those glaciers and the rough terrain give way to what seems like an unending blanket of white. The Greenland ice sheet. Beautiful and serene. But here, along an imaginary line called the Arctic Circle, there is a very real problem. A meltdown like none ever recorded in this area of the world.
That's pretty dramatic footage there, Sean. Take us through your experience reporting on global warming, particularly in that part of the world, and the impact it's had not just on glaciers, but on people's lives. I mean, was there anything that surprised you?
Oh, so much surprised me. I can't even begin where to start. I think that getting up there and realizing that above the Arctic Circle, it's an area that is warming twice as fast as any place on Earth. So the people who live in that, mostly Native Greenlanders, First Nation people in Canada, Native Alaskans, all the way around the globe, those people realized something's happening long before scientists did. And they were trying to get the word out. Look, the ice is thinner. We're getting fish that we've never caught up here. They're warmer water fish. What's going on? And what we used to catch is no longer here. And they were raising these alarms, and scientists would say, oh, this is anecdotal information. That's what they called it. And it turns out those folks up there who began to monitor it were right on the ball. And then as the scientists began to move into that area, every little thing turned into such a bigger event. They call it aerosols that land on the ice sheet, little dark pieces of carbon, things of that nature. And instead of reflecting the sunlight, it would absorb the sunlight. So it started making it so much warmer. That's what led to that massive melt-off in Greenland. And we were the first people that I know of to do an extensive show on that. Since then, a lot of people have done it, and good. We need to make people more aware of it. But again, it's one of the first things that CGTN wanted to do. And recognizing the thinning ice sheet and why that is important, that's kind of a scary thing. And there's no turning back the clock. You're trying to stop the clock hands right now. And people who just don't accept climate change, it baffles me. It really does.
Mike, there was a time when global warming was not on the public radar. CGTN, as Sean just told us a moment ago, has been a leader on covering climate change. But do you sense that there is a lack of urgency and interest in covering this crisis? I mean, what is the proper role for the media here?
I think there is a lack of urgency. I can tell you firsthand, as a freelance journalist, as an independent filmmaker, I've worked with U.S. networks for the last 30 years. And I've actually probably seen the networks in the United States spend millions and millions of dollars more so on wars, covering wars for weeks and months and years at a time, than on climate change, which is the greatest world war we're facing right now. And having come to CGTN has taken this issue so seriously and has become a leader in covering climate change because it's the most significant and most important story on the planet. And I've been covering a number of climate change issues, from wildfires to warming ocean waters to floods to drought. All of these stories driven by editors from CGTN who it seems every month I'm being contacted about another climate change stories. And these are the issues that have to be covered. This is the biggest story on the planet right now. There's no question about that. So to answer the first part of the question, the Western media, especially in the United States, needs to do more. We have to have more climate change coverage. There's no question about it. And fortunately, CGTN has taken the lead, I believe, internationally, in bringing attention to this and making people think and see it and feel the story.
Now, you've of course had your own experience reporting on global warming. Tell us about a couple of human barometers on climate change that you've met.
I call them human barometers because we have all kinds of different forms of barometers to measure things. But sometimes when we as humans walk outside our front door, and it's simple as saying, well, it's raining today. There you go. Well, there's a gentleman named Mike Williams. He's a Yupik, a native Alaskan, who I covered. He's a dog musher. He's run the Iditarod. He's had 5 brothers that led to his decision to mush the state with his dogs. 5 brothers who all died of alcoholism. He was on the verge of dying of alcoholism. He needed to stop drinking. So the best way to do that was to travel the country by dog sled. And in doing so, over a period of 6 to 10 years, he saw the changes in the climate. He saw the frozen rivers in the dead of winter in January. And I was with him in one January, where you should have sub-zero temperatures and 3 foot, a meter thick of ice on the rivers that were melting away. There was open water. Snowmobiles were falling through the ice. Homes on the riverbanks were falling into the waters. He is a human barometer who 30 years ago never saw this. But in the last 30 years or so, 3 decades, he's seen the change where you literally see ice melting before your eyes. The livelihood of people's lives are changing dramatically. He's seen this. And there is one other barometer I'd like to mention. His name is Patrick Burns, a salmon fisherman that I met fishing the Feather River in Northern California. Fished it for 30 years of his life. In this particular last year, no salmon, virtually no salmon in the rivers that were coming through, very few, because they weren't making the arduous 150-mile, 200-kilometer journey from the Pacific Ocean inland into Northern California where they spawn every year. The waters are too warm, he said. I'm not seeing the salmon. So these are people that are seeing and feeling the story. It's not just about getting on your smartphone and TikToking your way through your day. You have to be out and see and feel the story. And we should all be human barometers, wake up and start helping ourselves solve this problem.
Right. Have you come across this as well, Sean?
Absolutely. As he was talking about that, there are a couple of things I can think about. When I first went to Alaska and they talked about the ice thinning, you have to remember these Alaskan communities, they hunt whale, and that's what they live on throughout the long, cold winter. And so they'll harpoon the whale, then they pull it up onto the ice to bring it back to harvest. And when they pull it up on the ice would break. So they have to go further and further out, and they go out in little sealskin kayaks, so it becomes much more dangerous. And it's not just losing a way of life. I mean, you're talking about completely changing the climate of an entire area. And you talk about these human barometers, people who dive down the Florida Keys who've been doing that for 30 years. Well, 98% of the coral reefs down the Keys are dead. And you talk about a little change can make a huge difference. 1 degree centigrade is enough to warm the waters to kill the coral that's down in that area. You may think, well, it's underwater, what's the big deal? Well, it's home to 25% of all marine life, and if you look at the reefs all over the world, in Asia, the Great Barrier Reef, how important that is for protein source for an area where they don't have a lot of protein, you're talking about a burgeoning catastrophe in terms of the change in the water, the change in the wildlife, and it could lead to more hunger, which is the last thing the world needs right now.
Gabriel, you are CGTN's climate reporter. What types of stories attract your interest, and how has the growth of digital or online reporting impacted that?
Well, that's a great question, actually, and I wouldn't say that it's my interest in those stories. It's actually those stories come to us because nowadays, like Mike said, lots of people just TikTok their way through the day, and I'm actually one of those people. But I really see as if my peers or people of younger generations is TikToking about climate change, and it's not just about sea level rise or global warming. It's very typical, day-to-day life. How are they trying to lower their carbon footprint, and how they express their concerns over the things they care about? And all of the things, to me, when I receive that information, what I see is that what young people care about today. And I'm just so grateful that at CGTN America, we have this, we prioritize this and we value this opinion from the young generation, and we make that the priority of our reporting. So our reporting interest is, for example, the reports we've done, we focus on individual behaviors, we focus on entrepreneurial projects that are related to climate action. So it's more about the industrial revolution accelerated by climate action. And that's definitely very interesting to us and to our viewers. And I think come to the point of online reporting and digital growth, I think we're at a very interesting point when we talk about social media and algorithm, but sometimes we ignore or we forget the fact that they can actually be a force of good. Nowadays when we report, I grew up, when I was growing up, I remember my parents always yelled at me, finish your homework before you watch TV. And when I get older, it became, finish your homework before you scroll on your phone. So I do have this dual experience of two media platforms. But nowadays, when we sort of air a report on social media, airing it is not the end of it. People start to discuss, people start to comment on the topics. And when someone come into our page and see those comments, it's like we're forming a community. And that community is also part of our reporting. So that whenever people come in, they not only see the report we do, they also see the community we form. And that's a great enrichment to our reporting, and that makes everything becomes more powerful.
Mike, let's talk about wildfires. And you know a few things about this. You've been covering wildfires for a few years now. Climate change and global warming has been blamed for an increase in wildfires around the world. Officials tell us that there's increase in number of wildfires that we're seeing. We're also seeing that the kinds of wildfires that we see is growing in size as well. This is from your latest short film. Let's watch.
We just arrived in a small town in northeastern California.
Yes, sir, with the increase of wind and
Name of the town is Doyle, California.
I'll pull my crew up for a little bit.
So far, 33 homes have been destroyed here. Resident Jeff McCarger fears his home may be next. As flames have reached the front gate of his family's home that he refuses to leave.
A month ago, we had my daughter's wedding here. That's where the altar was.
McCarger says it all began on July 2nd, 2021, when lightning strikes in the Plumas National Forest on Sugarloaf Peak, becoming known as the Sugar Fire, quickly exploding into what's known as a mega fire, burning 100,000 acres or more, 40,000 hectares, generating its own powerful winds, racing across 30 miles, 50 kilometers of pine forest and grasslands over a 10-day period, reaching Doyle, California, Jeff McCarger's community, incinerating almost everything in its path. What is stunning about these wildfires in California is that more than 5,000 of them had broken out in just the first half of 2021. It's estimated there will be far more in 2021 than in all of 2020, which itself was a record year for wildfires in the state.
Incredible footage there, Mike. First, do you know if Jeff McCarger's home was destroyed?
Amazingly, he was one of the few homes there, one of the few homeowners that survived that fire that took, in that particular neighborhood, took out about 60 homes at the end of the day. And I saw him there and I said, Jeff, I said, why aren't you leaving? Are you going to leave? And he goes, you see the house? It's still there, isn't it? And that was his mentality. And he said, I've been through 4 of these, and that's sort of the bittersweet statement here, is that I've been through 4 of these, and these are massive wildfires. These are called career fires that firefighters 30 years ago saw once in their career. Now they're seeing them, every 4 or 5 a year in California, over 100,000 acres, 1 million acres burned. So many different things that happen with fire. Talking with Sean, he's done many stories on fires in Colorado. The after effect of flooding and mudslides and everything else that take place. People don't realize how damaging they are, and there's no end in sight. Not to mention, I want to say, the smoke from the fires will drift across this country in the United States. I've got a buddy in Connecticut who was choking on smoke from fires in California 5,000 kilometers away, 3,000 miles away. It's remarkable how damaging it is across the board for all people.
And Mike, one thing we can't forget about is the connection between climate change and not only these fires, but all kinds of punishing climate effects. The storms that are coming more frequently, more powerful, and they're more damaging. And people need to connect those dots and understand that the fires out west that are causing people to choke in the east, and the storms that blow through the Atlantic and go into the Gulf of Mexico, again, caused by this climate change. When you see a lawmaker walk on the floor and say, oh, look, they talk about climate change, it's snowing in early spring, so we don't have climate change. That's not what it means. It means you're going to have more frequent, more violent storms that are more unpredictable.
That's right.
Right, Mike, getting back to Jeff, how do you find people like him, and how do you get them to talk to you?
Well, first, CGTN, giving me the freedom to just go and find people, literally just go find the story. There's no dictate of like what we want. I just go into the fire, literally drive into the fire zone. In this case, 395, which is the main interstate and running north-south in California, completely shut down. No journalists were being allowed into the fire zone, where the human lives were being impacted, where firefighters were, where homeowners were. I met a California Highway Patrol officer. I showed him my camera. I said, I need to get in and film. Are you a journalist? Yes, sir. Let me see some credentials. Didn't have any. I'm a freelancer. But I have a video business card of combat video that I've shot in war zones over the years. And I always show that to authority. And when he saw that, he goes, oh, I can see this isn't your first rodeo. And he goes, get in there. It was beautiful. And I went in and I just literally drove into the smoke. And you could feel the heat getting more and more intense. The windscreen was just almost vibrating from the heat. And I drove onto this property where I saw firefighters, and sure enough, Jeff McCarger drives out on his ATV, and I'm like, why is this guy here? And there he was, and he was not going to leave his home because he's been through so many of them before.
Sean, let's turn to one of the 5 new CGTN America documentaries, 0 Hour United States. This is where you discuss extreme weather and the effect it's had on charter fishermen in Louisiana. There's a captain by the name of George Ricks that you talk with. Let's watch.
In his years on the water, he's seen Louisiana's delicate coastline wash away. By all accounts, this region is losing a football field worth of marshlands every 100 minutes.
Every year you come out, you see less and less land.
Oh, yeah. Well, right here, there was an island 2 years ago. There was an island right there. It's gone now. We all know what's happening. We see what's happening every day.
Let me ask you a bit about climate change. Do you think people down here have had their attitudes change in the last 15, 20 years about climate change?
Listen, I see it. We see it every day. We're out here every day, and everybody knows things are changing. You know, our hurricanes are getting more frequent and more powerful every year.
Shortly after this interview, Hurricane Ida hit the Louisiana coast hard. Its most punishing winds and storm surge sweeping through the very marshlands Ricks works. Scientists say it is climate change at its most devastating.
Now, Sean, that part of the United States has been repeatedly hit by extreme weather. As people like Ricks embrace the urgency of the climate crisis, do you find that there are more people who are now willing to talk about this, willing to be interviewed?
Yeah, and it's kind of a double-edged sword. People definitely want to talk about it, but in that area, and you have to remember, this is an area that in the United States we call a pretty strong red state. A lot of them will not accept the term climate change. So you have to ask them, like, well, the land's sinking, the tides are rising, there's all kinds of problems. And now George does. He's a character. Captain George is just a super guy, and he gets it. And he's one of the people leading the fight down there among the older guard to really accept and embrace this change and get people to talk about it. So a lot of people are coming on board, but it's not as easy as you would think. But in terms of getting people to talk, a lot of people are frustrated. It's interesting because that area we went and profiled, that is exactly where the eye of Hurricane Ida came over and just did all that devastation to Louisiana's marshlands, wetlands washing away. And you'll hear in there that Louisiana is losing about 100 yards of wetlands every 100 minutes. every 100 minutes. That's not a misquote. So it's just washing away. And they have a plan to come in as the Mississippi goes down into the Gulf, and it used to fan out and then feed those deltas, those wetlands, and make that land. Well, they leveed and dammed the area years ago to control the flooding where people lived. It saved lives, but it cut off all the nutrients going to those areas, so that's caused it to wither. Now they want to open 2 areas and funnel out the Mississippi about 12% in both ways and allow the sediment to go, but it's going to change the rich fishing beds forever. You're going to lose the oysters in that area, the crabs, the shrimp, and the speckled trout that go down that area are going to move to different areas. So people are going to have to completely redo what they've done in that region. So even though they understand they're losing this ground because of climate change, they don't want to lose what they have. So nothing is easy in this climate fight. So people just have to continue to try to educate and paint both sides of the picture, because if they do nothing, it's all going to be gone.
Gabriel, extreme weather has led to major flooding in China. That's as the government moves ahead with its green energy strategy. Let's take a look at another current CGTN documentary. This one is 0 Hour China.
From droughts and wildfires in the western United States to heat waves in France and Spain, countries around the world are trying to adapt to the globe's changing climate. In July, record-breaking rains in China killed more than 300 people.
In Zhengzhou, the people there, their life was really threatening at that time by the flooding. Like before that, many people in China don't have an idea of climate change. And they will not connect the specific disaster with climate change. But after that, more and more people started to discuss about this issue, and more expertise will just stand up and say its relationship with climate change. It's a disaster, absolutely. And it's also like signal for us to be aware of the climate change and its negative effect, and to know that China cannot survive in the global climate change.
Well, with China promoting green energy in recent years, the nation's solar industry is expected to see more growth and likely surpass wind power as the country's third largest source of electricity.
Since 2011, China's solar power market has grown enormously. In 2015, China outranked Germany as the world's largest producer of photovoltaic energy. Photovoltaic cells are the main component of a solar panel.
So Gabriel, talk to us about the impact of climate change in China and China's goal of reducing carbon emissions and moving to a green economy.
Mm-hmm. Well, first I want to give a shout out to our team. I think that was a very beautifully made documentary, and I think the impact of climate change in China is as devastating as it's impacting everywhere. I remember not very long ago I traveled to New Orleans to report about the aftermath of Hurricane Ida, and the image and the casualty and the scene was very similar to the flood and the heavy rainfall in China. I think we are really combined together in this the suffering of the consequence of climate change. But I think there is something that's very interesting. In China, the social structure is very top-down. I mean, you have the policy first, and then that motivates everyone and every sector to take action. And there was a very interesting research done by a professor at Yale University on climate communication that says, when you frame the issue differently, you have different public perception. When he researched about, asking people, do you care about climate change? Not so many people answered yes, but when he asked about if you care about global warming, then lots of people say yes, because they can relate to the problem. And in China, this climate change crisis or climate action is being framed as an opportunity for growth. You know, we've seen lots of sectors. The automobile sector, for example, is searching for more advanced technology for clean energy. And I have lots of friends in China who graduated from elite universities, are now in the suburban area helping farmers to deal with their garbage disposals. So all of these actions, we can see that under the umbrella of the overall policy structure are moving forward China's overall plan for green transition. And you know, China has been very ambitious and robust in terms of goal setting. China has set the goal of reaching carbon neutral by 2060, which is a far shorter period comparing with advanced economies in terms of how long they took to reach that goal. But I think when you have, you know, the government and the people and different sectors acting together, that ambition is very pragmatic and very absolutely necessary. So yeah, we've seen the aftermath and the devastating result of climate crisis and extreme weather, and I think that could be a catalyst factor for China, and as a matter of fact, for many countries to you know, really accelerate their actions on that.
Mike, one of the things we've seen in these Zero documentaries is the role of young people, and we've seen young people now move to the front lines in this battle against climate change. How significant is that?
Oh, it's the future. And now I want to say that TikToking your way through the day is a good thing.
Thank you.
I agree.
I'll tell my parents that.
Yes, no, and my daughter would say the same thing. She's 18 years old. Gabriel is absolutely right about the youth connecting through social media, TikToking. And that is very significant because now you've got Greta Thunberg's all over the world in every country.
Thank heaven for her, right?
Yeah. Well, she started it. She's created, in a sense, you know, excuse the pun, but a wildfire of communication, where kids around the world are seeing. They are human barometers, the old school way, where they're seeing the drought, they're seeing the flooding, they're seeing the impact of climate change everywhere around them, and they also now have social media, which is an extremely important communicative device to get the message out there. So I'm very hopeful that they can sort of carry on this fight in the future. And I believe they will.
And Gabriel, what are your thoughts on the role of young people, especially in a country like China?
Well, I think I would just start with the United States, actually, because a few days ago I was at Georgetown University interviewing their students in terms of what's their climate action plan. And lots of people were very ambitious. They were saying that young people today need more political avenue for action in the future, that it's just not enough for them to, you know, to do something on their own. So I think that's a very, very positive sign. And in China, like I mentioned, lots of my friends, they're devoting their career to help you know, less developed areas to move forward with their energy or their garbage disposal, which is absolutely very important. But I think the most important and most inspiring thing is that young people are engaging with this, and they're changing the game. When we talk about young people, it's just young people, you know, kids and students and everything. But when we talk about young people as a demographic concept, they have different value set. And business are reacting to that because they are going to be the mainstream of customers. And it's the same with business as it is the same with politics. So I really think that young people have a crucial role to play, you know, in this climate action because they are just, you know, the major demographic group that we have. So they're going to define a lot of things.
And finally, to you, Sean, will the next generation be the generation that makes the difference?
I think absolutely, in one word. And if I can kind of piggyback on what my colleague Gabriel was talking about, I've been going to China since I was a much younger man, since 2012, and I've seen China change dramatically. And I think we have to connect, again, all the dots. It's not just climate, it's education, it's poverty. And if you look at how China has changed so dramatically in the past 10 years, people talk about the Paris Climate Accord, how significant that was. But let's go back to 2009, when China, rightly or wrongly, was blamed for that one not being completely embraced, that climate conference. And you fast forward a few years, and President Xi was one of the people at the pedal down saying, we need to do something now, and got all of China on board. And with its massively growing middle class, 800 million people, lifting so many people out of poverty, getting kids through education, that's what's making the big difference then. People can look and say, I don't want my kids to go outside and play and have to wear masks. And it's not just pollution from factories. You're talking about the dust coming in from the deserts to the west. So as they change that, as they embrace all of that, lifting people out of poverty, stronger economy, those are the things that are making a difference. And the U.S. really dropped the ball the last 4 years. They're playing pickup. And if you talk to anybody in the government, whether it be somebody from the Department of Natural Resources or EPA, they really feel like it was a missed opportunity. If you're going to try to keep the temperature from not raising more than 2 to 3 degrees centigrade since the Industrial Revolution, to control those gases coming in, it's a real battle. So it's good that we have young people going through TikTok, looking at the videos and understanding what is at stake and really putting all of it together and understand it is going to be a global effort.
And that's where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for being with us. And that's it for this edition of CGTN's Global Action Initiative. I'm Anand Naidu. Our special coverage on the climate crisis continues. Up next, the premiere of the CGTN documentary, Zero Hour Europe.